And we're back with our Sunday panel to continue the discussion of what Mr. Trump said in our exclusive interview. George, as you may have noticed, we called this hour the Trump way. Have you ever seen a transition like this one in all your years in Washington where the president-elect seems to be taking over?
Nothing remotely like this. At the Army-Navy game, he said to you, presidency is a daunting responsibility. He looks completely undaunted to me.
I totally agree with that. Let me say, he seems, not that he's unmindful of responsibility, but he's comfortable assuming the role of president, assuming the role of commander-in-chief.
He is wielding power now. He wielded it in the Carrier case. He still has 40 days to go before he stands at the Capitol and gets sworn in. Just think if we were in the position we were in 1932 when Roosevelt comes in and they still didn't inaugurate a president until March 4th. That caused all kinds of problems because Hoover tried to entangle FDR in his own policies. Mr. Obama's in a very difficult position here because he's sitting there saying, technically I'm president. And Mr. Trump is not impressed by that technicality.
No. And in fact, sometimes you have to remind yourself of that Mr. Obama is still president, which brings me to you, Julie Pace. What did they make of this at the White House, the degree to which Mr. Trump is taking over?
I think they do find it unusual to some extent. I think there was some expectation, particularly when they thought it was going to be Clinton who was elected, that Obama would have some more freedoms during this last couple of weeks because he would be handing off to someone who presumably would keep whatever he was doing in place. You're not seeing Obama enact a lot of policies. He is doing some small bore measures, some cleanup right now. But I think the most important thing that's happening at the White House right now is what's going on behind the scenes in terms of Obama's conversations with Trump. I am told they are speaking on a somewhat regular basis and that the president-elect is asking very real questions, actually trying to get some guidance from President Obama. And I think the White House sees this as an opportunity to try to preserve some of what's in place right now, try to make their sales pitch to the president-elect before he ends up in the White House.
Chuck, Mr. Trump is holding a news conference this week to announce what his relationship is going to be with his various business interests. But from his answers in our interview, it didn't sound to me like he's going to pass muster with the ethics police.
You know, he seemed to be driving at this kind of distinction between the kind of existing business of whatever it is, the Trump organization, and any new business.
That's exactly what I took from it, too.
Right.
Deals.
Right. We won't do anything new, but I will turn it over to my family, I guess, and my managers to handle the existing. George and I were talking about this before the show, we couldn't come up with a comparable example in American history, of the American presidency. The closest I can think of is old Zachary Taylor in the 19th century, who had a big plantation in Louisiana that he was running while president. But that's partly to Trump's advantage in the sense that he's saying, well, look, this has never happened before, so I can kind of make up a rule with all this discretion that I have. The problem, of course, is that, as you said, this is Clinton Foundation on steroids. All the people doing business with the Trump organization, even if it's not a new deal, are going to be naturally thinking, like, how can this help me if I do this, that, or the other thing? And it is going to be a standing issue. He could have solved it, I think, with more disclosure, but we know he's not a big disclosure guy from the whole tax return.
Jason, I want to dig down into what he could do. I mean, presidents traditionally have stocks, they have investments, and they put those in a blind trust, and that's pretty simple. Here's a guy who owns buildings that have Trump splashed all over them, and as he said in the interview, you can't sell a building in a day or a week or a month. I mean, that's a big deal. So what reasonably could he be expected to do to divest himself or separate himself from these buildings, these interests?
I think there are limits to what he can do. Transparency would help. But I'm worried more, Chris, about the pendulum swinging too far in the other direction. If we're going to require everyone running for elected office to divest, we're going to end up with professional politicians like Obama and Clinton. And I don't know that that's healthy. We elected a businessman, and I think the press needs to get used to that. This is not a non-politician who's in office, who's had a past life building assets and so forth. And what we can ask of him is transparency. Yes, conflicts will arise from time to time. We can find independent agencies to deal with those on a case-by-case basis. I don't think this is as big a deal as the press is making.
But I want to ask you about that, because there are small cases like apparently the Trump Hotel here in D.C. Suddenly every foreign government is booking their Christmas party or whatever. That's fairly small. I mean, when you're talking about the cost of a conference room. But President-elect Trump had a phone call with the president of the Philippines, Duterte, a pretty controversial character. He's got the Trump Tower Manila going on there. And to the degree that there's something going on with the Trump Tower Manila that might benefit his company, even an existing hotel, is that something that people are going to say, well, gosh, he's making money? Or conversely, that it's a way for them to curry favor?
That's why transparency is important here, and everyone's interests have to be out there on the table. But I don't think the American people are thinking that Trump is going to use this position to make money. I think he's right when he says, I could make much more money not being president than I can as being president. And I think the American people respect it. Again, they elected a businessman. They elected a non-politician. And I don't think that they're expecting as much as the press is expecting.
The American people may respect it, but Chuck, I'm not sure the media is going to respect it. I would think they're going to, we are going to be all over them.
This is what reporters call a target-rich environment, because every single hotel, business deal, land, whatever, will be fly-specced for any I mean, the one you said about the Philippines is a perfect example. And it would make all the difference in the world if the president-elect himself had a somewhat different affect and attitude about this. His attitude in the interview with you was very defiant. And he said, and he invoked some vague doctrine that says, the law says I can do whatever.
But in fairness, the conflict of interest laws, correct me if I'm wrong, do not apply to the president and the vice president.
That's true, but he could say, and he didn't, doesn't matter, I'm going beyond that. Doesn't matter because of the absolute need to avoid any appearance of impropriety, I'm going to go the extra mile. And he seems actually to be taking the position like, I'm going to do the minimum that I'm entitled to do.
So, Julie, we have less than a minute left. As somebody who's going to be in the front row of the Trump press room, how big a deal is this going to be?
I think it's going to be a significant part of our coverage of the presidency. I don't think it's going to be every day the dominant story. But if I'm President-elect Trump, I would want the American people to know that I don't have any conflicts of interest. I think it's in his interest for his presidency to be more transparent, to be more clear with the public, whether they care or not. I think it's in his interest to give us more information going forward. It will be less of an issue the more transparent he is.
I think Donald Trump's going to determine his own interest, not Julie Pay's. Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday.